Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We're happy to see so many faces here this morning at the beginning of the year. It's a year full of uncertainty, and we will try to reduce this uncertainty to a certain extent with our series of Leaders Angles. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Anders Aspling. He is Secretary General of the Global Responsibility Leadership Initiative called the GRL, and he is Senior Advisor to the EFMD, well known to the Business School as one of the accreditation agencies of the Business School. The GRLI was formed in 2004 by the EFMD with the support of the United Nations Global Compact, and it consists of representatives of companies and business schools, institutions of learning on 60 continents, and we are proud to be one of the first generation signatories of that compact. The GRLI is focused on hands-on action and support the development of a next generation of globally responsible leaders. Anders' background includes research and lecturing at the Stockholm School of Economics, from which he received his PhD degree. His focus was on organization theory, human resources, industrial relations and democracy, management development, and applying emerging strategies. From 1988 to 1993, he was Senior Vice President of Organizational and Human Resource Management of a large construction company in Sweden. From 1993 to 2001, he was President, Dean and Managing Director of the Swedish Institute of Management. And from 2001, he has been a Senior Associate of MIL Institute, a management and leadership developing organization in Sweden. He recently served as Dean of Frederik Louwenthal Management School in Belgium. He's a native of Sweden, but lives in Belgium, and as the swallows in Europe, he sometimes migrate to Sweden and then frequently migrate to South Africa, where we are very happy to have him. Anders, you are very welcome.
Thank you. Yes, it is. It works well. It's an honor, privilege to be with you. I visited your school quite a few times, but it's the first time I have the opportunity to address a group like this, so it's going to be lovely. I would like to decide on and find out on the timing to begin with. I think I have 45 minutes, is that it? And then we have time for questioning. So I'll try to stick to that, because otherwise we could have had one part, we could have broken 4 questions, and then we could have moved on. But I'm going to try to follow that and be as efficient as possible. I have quite a few slides that's going to help us to go through the message I have, and I'm going to come back to the flow of my message, so don't worry about that. But I would like to say a few things to begin with. Leo touched upon the fact that we are living in demanding times, let's put it that way. And there are uncertainties like probably never before or for quite some time. All of this makes business and leadership activities rather complicated and complex. And especially when we bring in issues of sustainability, which has to be there, because it becomes terribly interdisciplinary, it becomes complex, there aren't any ready-made matrices to just turn to, it's pretty soft. A lot of people even interpret it as being, quite blurred and easy, difficult to understand. It's about ideology, politics, beliefs, passion, commitment. So it's so much more than what we regularly have trained for and what we regularly focused on in business skills. Personally, I think it's about time that we open up and widen our scope and bring a holistic perspective into the business schools. So for us, it's basically a duty and an opportunity. But I wanted to start on that first because it is times of change. Is the show on? Or should I? There. No. So I just use that one. Yeah. And when I back up, how do I back up? So I can actually move forward on the other one. Be careful not to do anything else. No, I wanted to go back. I'll do this. What's happening? Is it? Or can I use this as a mark? And I have to get out of the show. I want to go back to the first slide. All the way back. There you are. Okay. That's easier for me. Okay. I'll leave them out. Because I can move around anyway. Ian introduced me. You can read more about the GRLI on www.grli.org. So I'm not going to say too much about that. The same goes for the EFD. And I think quite a few of you are familiar with these organizations anyway. And I'm going to say just a few words to start with regarding the GRLI. Because it started as a very, very open idea in 2002. We had an annual conference or an annual meeting of the EFD in Bangkok, together with other associations in the world. We call that Global Forum. It happens every now and then. And for that conference, EFD, I chaired the annual conference. We had prepared a conference on the theme of global responsibility, which was not being found on the web in those days because we Googled for it. It was not a combination of that kind in 2002. That workshop, because we set it up as a huge workshop, ended in a declaration or a manifesto from the EFD that we were going to devote much, much more time than we did in the past to issues of sustainability and global responsibility. And this is a quote from my chairman at that time, that if you want to be sure that you get responsible managers, you start, of course, with the educational element. Somehow they're trained and maybe aware of what is relevant in the way they run the company. That was the kickoff. The board decided to go ahead with this. I was on the board then. I've been on the board for 12 years. I took on the responsibility of trying to turn words into action, because what we did in Bangkok was basically just think and get very, very excited and engaged. And that's how the GRLI started to unfold. And the mission of GRLI, which also Ian touched upon, is to act as a catalyst to develop the next generation of globally responsible leaders. And as such, we look upon it as a pioneering group of schools and companies engaged hands-on in developing the next generation of globally responsible leaders. That's what I'm used to. This is my machine. Got it. That's my device. See, the hand goes down to the pocket. And to do this, we have 3 themes that we are actually focusing around and challenging. And that's the issue of the company for the 21st century, the purpose of the firm, or a new theory of the firm, whatever we want to call it. The mission of business schools and learning institutions and the role of the school, and the process for cultural change in organizations. Right now, this is from 2007, so it's not the purely accurate map of the global community of GRLI. We are today some 60 plus selected partners from around the world, and it is an expanding worldwide community of action and learning, businesses and business schools, learning institutions and partnerships. In partnership, hands-on developing the next generation of globally responsible leaders. And this is important because we have our relation to the United Nations Global Compact as a foundation for us, because we joined forces in inviting businesses and schools together. So it's a joint project between EFMD and Global Compact, as you can see in the logos down there. So we looked upon a laboratory or an avant-garde or a greenhouse for the learning dimension of the UN Global Compact and the implementation of the principles for responsible management education, which is taken by the United Nations Global Compact as guidance for the way we develop management education over the next years. It was taken in Geneva last year. I have information on that later on if we find time for it, but I'm going to leave it for now. This is what we do. We develop and produce results on 3 levels: the wider impact, the value for the partner organizations, and of course the individual and personal growth for those participating and representing the partner organizations. Focus task, special format, global community of action and learning, guiding principles, action-oriented, result orientation, long-term effects, uniqueness, we don't do anything that is done elsewhere, diversity as a lever, passion and commitment to making a difference. Okay, that was just very, very brief about URI, and you can read more on the website, and you can also find writings, you can find reports, you can find all kinds of things like that, and you can find references to other material as well. This is going to be, this morning, about corporate citizenship and responsibility and global responsible leadership. And when I read your webpage and how I was introduced, it said that I was going to talk about how to ensure that the next generation of business leaders act in a globally responsible way. And I'm going to try to tell you how I look upon that, and it's going to be in 3 parts. It's going to be quite impressionistic, so you have to be creative and open-minded and sort of follow that. But I think that it's crucial that we are clear on the business case. That is fundamental. And I'm going to go through quite a few cases or examples of how the business case today could be argued. The second one is that we also need to introduce a wider responsibility for businesses in the emerging global context that we experience. I think that's crucial as well. I'm going to go through the arguments for that as well. And then change the way we teach and educate managers and leaders. And to that extent, I do have one part on global responsible leadership, but I also have a final part on my personal thoughts regarding the school of the future. I may share that if we have time at the end of the morning as well. Okay. The flow then is pretty much like this. It's 5 parts. It should have been 3 if I would have been a brilliant pedagogical guy. I'm much more oriented towards the substance, I guess. But anyway, I'm going to say a few words about the global context, so to frame the further discussion. The changing business world, we're going to touch upon that. The cases for enhanced corporate responsibility. Question if there are changing business models emerging or not, and how they emerge. Global responsible leadership. And then I thought we were going to take time for reflection and questions after that. Maybe we'll turn around the 2 last parts, and I'll just give you my view on new and appropriate education in the school of the future before we start the questions and answers. Let's see where we stand time-wise. But we're doing okay so far. So this is the structure, and as always, it's probably to make me feel safe. Is it okay? Because you wouldn't say no. I would like to hear that. Yes. This is one way of looking at our globe for the time being, and you could add many ways of describing it. financial unrest, population growth, failing states, resource-based consumerism, deepening divide between rich and poor. It's clear that we live in a changing world, and it's a global reality, still a global reality, that social and economic inequalities are among the most explosive sources of potential conflicts, and we should never ever forget that. We also know that the environmental issues can be handled only at a planet scale, and the richest are not always the best committed, and that is a challenge in itself. Dissident voices are increasing and represent a threat for businesses themselves, and we have, at least over the last 3 or 4 years, had the questions of the public acceptance of the liberal economy as such. This is a picture of the resource situation we're finding ourselves in. If we used the natural resources of the earth to the extent that it's used sometimes, some places in the world, and in the United States is worse. It's not much better in Europe. But if we used it the way it's used in the United States, we would need 3.5 globes. We don't have 3.5 globes, so it's a totally unsustainable situation. We live in a world which I think is fascinating from many perspectives, because it's a richness in it. It's interconnected in a way that has never been interconnected before, and it's interdependent. And that in itself presents huge opportunities for mankind to bridge, to cross boundaries, and to help out. But it also makes you quite sad to realize that there is so much done wrong and so much undone. It's a small world, and it's a fragile world. And I usually use a quote to sort of illustrate this, which is from a physicist and not from an economist. This is John Agnew of Dartmouth, Harvard, CERN, Stanford. He's been in all places. I think it's Dartmouth now. The deepest level of truth, uncovered by science and philosophy, is the fundamental truth of the unity. At the deepest submutal level of our reality, you and I are literally one. So the question is, if there are too many of us and not enough of these, where will the world focus? This is a totally different slide. I'm going to try to explain it to you, because this is another way of where the world stands from my perspective. My grandparents came out of a world where what counted was very much physical stuff and physical resources. It was a world where the engineering was key, where natural resources played a major role, where most people were living stationary. They were generalists, and they managed on their own in that sense, and they worked and functioned as collectives. That's not far. Coming from Sweden, which you don't probably know that much about, it didn't start its industrialization until early 20th century. So it's very, very late. It's more than 100 years after the Industrial Revolution in the UK. So we went from being a pure labor, what do you call it? Agrarian, yeah, country, to a quite advanced industrial country in 8 years, basically, over my dad's lifetime. But anyway, that's where we come from. And in the Western world, we had pretty much this step-by-step process of developing into then the knowledge-based world, where the brain and the intellect started to be the key resource, where education played a key role, where patents then became a way of utilizing that intellectual development. It was long-term oriented. We started to specialize, and we were functionally oriented, and it was individualistic. That's where I'm raised. And in those times, in those days, that's where the cities started to grow around rivers and streams and that sort of thing. And there we have the cities growing around universities and learning institutions. Today, then, what's happening, and if it's a paradigm shift or not, that doesn't really matter, but something is going on. We live in a world today where we see much, much more importance of communication. Networking is becoming incredibly important. Patents are getting less and less worth. And it's more about concepts, developing concepts. It's very fast, short term, it's very complex, it's value-based, and it's contextual. To illustrate it, because I think it's a beautiful illustration and I like to tell it, when I got my first pair of blue denim jeans, I was 6 years old. It was 1956 in Sweden. My grandma was actually visiting, it's true. She felt the denim and the pants, and she wondered about if this was good quality cotton. This is really good quality cotton, right? My mom took that same jeans and she felt it and looked at it and wondered, will this keep Anders warm? In the winter time, are they warm enough? Will they last? Will they don't fade too much? So she was very, very into the functional part. My grandmother was into the material part of it. Our son, Carl, he today wears jeans and pays 10 times the price that we did, that are torn already from the beginning. Freezing cold. I mean, you can't wear them in Sweden, you shouldn't wear them in Sweden, but they do. And basically no material at all. So it's a totally different prison, right? So it's moved from having had something to do with the light is it there? Yeah. Material, to function, where my mom was and where I'm raised, to something which may have to do with identity or values or whatever it is. And that's my son. I'm here, I'm stuck here. I see this, but I can't really handle all of it. It's fascinating. So this is where the Western world pretty much has moved over the last 150 to 150 years. The amazing thing, though, and I think that is the point to realize how complex the world is today, that today these three worlds live side by side in emerging economies around the world. I just came back from Peru a couple of months ago, and there you have the three plateaus. You have actually the oldest growth. Then you have the next one, right? You have the Incas all the way. No, you have the rainforest. You have the rainforest right here. You have the Incas who are starting to develop there. And you have the white Spanish on the coast, and they're over there. So you have it parallel side by side. And what the consequences of that is, I don't know. But it's very, very complex, and it's very, very exciting. How do we teach for a world like that? That's another question. And I'm leaving it, look, I could have gone on here, but I'm leaving it with that question. We're going to talk about the changing business world as well. And for sure the business world is changing. And we're going to add corporate responsibility to that. The key thing that I reflect upon when I look on business from a global perspective is that we don't have a global governance system at hand, which means that businesses probably today play much, much more globally looked upon it an important role than maybe ever before. We don't have national states that manage to coordinate in a global governance way. So the world today is pretty much developing from the drive of many, many regions that is shaping the global development in many different ways. And we also see new collaboration between emerging and rapidly growing economies develop at the same time as the North and the West have our own challenges to address. So there are shifts going on in the mapping of the world and regarding the economic powers, for sure. There are emerging economies that grow and increase in importance, and companies from, I think you know this, from Latin America, from India and China, are expanding very, very much so in the northwest regions of the world, and not just in their own regions. Many of these companies have over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years become large multinational, international companies just like the ones we know. And it's an amazingly rapid development. So, to conclude that, there is a question about the role of business in society. That's on the agenda just about everywhere today. The environmental issues have dominated the debate, the global warming and our war and all this, but the wider social responsibility is explicitly on the agenda as well, both in a local, regional, and global perspective. I would like to run to start with the case for corporate responsibility from a pure business perspective, and do it sort of like this. The first part of it is the business case. There is a growing concern, let's put it that way, among consumers for sustainable global development, economically as well as socially and ecologically. So the customers and the market is evaluating ecologically sound products and ecologically sound production. So that has become a competitive dimension. That is no question. We can discuss to what extent. But it has increased and it is there. So no really competitive organization who's working on a larger scale can ignore to take into account ecological issue or sustainability issues. So the customer in the market is a clear indication of that there is a business case in being globally responsible. We also have different kinds of initiatives. We have the principles for responsible investment. We have the principles on global reporting initiative. We have the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. There are lots of things like that. In Europe today, regulations on especially the environmental side is being heavily discussed, and they are passing and they're being introduced. So from a business perspective, again, there are regulations and there are initiatives that are just there to be followed. And relating to this, it's quite interesting also to see that over the last 5 years, up until the financial crisis now, the corporations on the top 500 on the exchange market in New York that has had sustainability issues and social responsibility on their agenda has outperformed the ones that hasn't. So there are indications in figure that it has been successful. The crisis has turned that around, but up until then, that was the case. I had a graduation ceremony 3.5 months just before the Peru trip in Copenhagen. And when I came there to an executive MBA group, I read in the paper in the morning that the Danish bank, the Danske Bank, had actually just left 13 companies for ethical reasons, a worth of 179 million euro. They had 17 more on a dialogue list worth 500 million euro. So things are happening Large banks have, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working with UBS in Switzerland and the Cantonal Bank in Switzerland. Both of them have on top, above their asset management group, they have a group who actually clears what investments that are allowed and not. And 3 years ago, the last time I was very close in touch with them, the automobile industry was banned as such. So they didn't buy any shares or invest in the automobile industry at all. And the reason for that was not that they didn't do anything, they didn't do close to what they had the potential to do. So these issues are becoming crucial business issues. This side, of course, we know that securing and attracting human resources is a key for any issue for any enterprise. There's 2 dimensions here: the need to participate in contributing to develop human resources that we need, and the other one is what we usually call the war for talent. Right? It is both. It's the basic being able to provide and develop resources and secure that we have them, but also, of course, competing for the talent. The next one, reaching and developing new markets, is also a key dimension for any sustainable business venture. And the opportunities and the possibility of this may be greater than ever in the current globalization process, but it's a highly competitive task and needs entrepreneurship and creativity executed hand in hand. I'm going to come back with a quote on that. But these are 4 clear indicators that there is a business case for being corporate responsible. The moral case, because there is a moral case as well. And the moral case is based on a view that businesses are increasingly powerful in the globalization process we see today. The moral case argues that this power of making a difference beyond the pure business progress and acting for other specific purposes than pure business growth becomes an obligation. So the power you have at your fingertips also gives you responsibilities. This is a ladder, I usually call it my ladder, which takes us from where pretty much it started. The things are even. It started with risk management, things and with philanthropy. A lot of organizations realized that if they didn't behave in a socially acceptable and sound way, they run the risk of destroying their brand and being worthless. The next step in that development was realizing that this is good business. It's not just lowering our risk. We can make money out of being much, much more responsible towards society and towards how we handle our stakeholders. And that's when the CR and the CSR conceptual sort of framework came in. In the GRI, we have played around with even another level, which I think needs to be addressed, but which is much, much more difficult, because then it's like an ideological shift. If you think about that, instead of looking upon it as a strategy for good business or risk management, you look upon it as an integrated part of your business. It's part of your role. Then it becomes quite tricky for the system that we live in, for most of the companies that we know. Because that is something more than philanthropy. It's something more than just seeing an enhanced social engagement as a pure business strategy. This addresses the controversial issue of widening the explicit purpose of the business and to open and transparently engage and collaborate with the wider group of stakeholders. We have that definition of the purpose of the firm in the first report that we issued in 2005, where we actually propose that the new purpose should be to create economic and societal progress in a global, responsible, and sustainable way, and that should go hand in hand and be equally important. There is another case which I label as systemic or in between. It's built on a holistic view and a collaborative approach. It's also built on the fact that if you have the power, you have responsibilities. This is the way I'm raised and taught to look upon the world. And in my very, very well organized Swedish country, it was run like three separate spheres for a long, long time. Government did their thing, and they did it beautifully perfect. They developed the welfare systems and all that sort of thing. Civil society took care of the soccer and the athletics, and we had something called learning circles, actually, where you can engage in voluntary learning and education. And then we have business sector. In the world we see today, in the global world, there is much, much more need to tackle the challenges we have for crossing the boundaries of these three spheres. And that is a challenge because we're not trained for that. I have a couple of quotes from McKinsey report on that later on. So it's evident that we realize it, we don't really know how to handle it. And again, I mark business red because I think businesses play a key role on the global scale. This is from the CEO study by McKinsey, the first quote. They have I think it's a biannual, maybe it's every 3 years, on CEOs on social issues and strategy. And this is the one from 2007. More and more business leaders recognize that the company's future is increasingly intertwined with the needs and demands of society. What many executives don't understand is how best to manage that changing relationship. They're not really trained for it. Not really. I'll move on. Again, with the question of, is there a changing business model emerging or coming through? The future, frankly, is to sustain our business. It needs true and genuine partnership with society. So again and again, the realization, the insight is coming back. Bill Gates, who had actually quite an interesting article. Anyone read it in Times in July, August? This year? On how to fix capitalism? Where he argues for that we should actually bring capitalism to more people around the world and the blessing of it, right? And that we haven't even, there are markets out there to conquer for we haven't even touched the continent already. So he also said that creating capitalism in answer to that short there are markets all over the world that businesses have missed. So he's looking upon actually blessing the world with progress, social and economic, by introducing liberal economy to a larger extent and actually move out and be creative in parts of the world where we never thought we could really do good business. My question is, again, is it enough with creative capitalism? Or do we need to introduce the responsible dimension by itself, in itself? Do we need to take that moral step? But that is a difficult question, and it is ideology. Ban Ki-moon said the following last summer: business may be the catalyst to bring peace and prosperity to the world. The world of business possess the power to make these objectives, the Millennium Goals, a reality. And then he also added the contribution of business will also be essential. But he's taken off, or taken over where Kofi Annan was, but it goes even a little bit further and say that businesses can play even a large, important role in bringing peace and prosperity to the world as such. And as you know, at the UN right now, they are trying to integrate the UN Global Compact, and they're trying to integrate the business community to a larger extent. It's not easy because the United Nations is not constituted like that at all. But they're working on bringing that third sphere into the system, just for the same reasons as we mentioned when we had the fixed rates on the slide. And all this very, very good. I miss one thing, and this is the last on the argument for corporate responsibility, because there is a higher order logic to this. First, on an environmental perspective, because our entire resource consuming system recognizes no constraints to consumption growth. That is a fact. That is where we are at this time, at the time being. And there is assuming the survival of our species. The heritage change. Assuming there is. It has to be mentioned. It has to be there. As an alarm. Our integrated global system is spectacularly failing to deliver a better life for all. And we have a chairman in GRI who is from Joburg, was an executive at Barnwell, and now living in Comici, Mark Drew, who actually adds to this that we live in a system that is failing on two accounts, social justice and the right to life. That's a pretty core factor. So there is the business case, there's the moral case. We can expand the role of the business in society. You can discuss the importance in globalization we see today of crossing boundaries between politics, business, and civil society and collaborate. But you also have these overriding challenges, which leads to questions, and I have plenty of them. This is a fun part of it, showing you lots of questions. Just letting them sit there for the time being. Our business and society is trapped in a badly functioning economic system. Do we have an alternative system, more efficient and sustainable, available or not? There's often talked about systemic versus individual change, and we all wait for or expect that this, or we recognize that the systemic change is key. It's all right, and how to get there. And I believe it all comes by all of us doing whatever we can as individuals right here and now. What can I do to take responsible action? And then ending on this note, we have worked within GRI on immediate issues that we recognize as key needs for the training of managers for the future. And we've worked around entrepreneurship, leadership, and statesmanship. And there is actually right now a manifesto or a call for action on our website. So if you go to our website now, you can read a urgent call for action. And that call for action basically deals with the entrepreneurial dimension, the leadership, and the statesmanship. It's a pretty neat little pamphlet that you can print, you can read, you can print, and I recommend that. I have it here so you can copy it for you if you want to as well. Globally responsible leaders, I said that was going to be, this is one of the last parts. This is a text from when we set off with the first report. There's lots to read in that report on what we believe globally responsible leadership is. But I'm not going to recapitulate that at all. But this is a good quote. The core aspect is the degree to which the individual has developed his or her own level of consciousness and awareness of both the external global context and the inner dimension of themselves. This is the starting point which defines the extent to which they are able to turn with others, right action in the global setting. And I think that's very good if you read it. It means that what we are introducing into our training are for sure dimensions of leadership and personal growth to a larger extent than we did, for sure, but also global events. My few thoughts on characteristics, and this is from the report and from our discussions, but it's something to just feed you with and and you will have slides afterwards. You can go back to them and change them and make them better or translate them into your context or whatever. Globally responsible leaders, they embrace the global view and global ethics, such as those reflected in the principles of the UN Global Compact and the Millennium Development Goals. They recognize that businesses have the creativity and resources to address and make a big contribution to many of the most important social and environmental challenges before us. They have the global consistency in their general principles and standards, yet are sensitive and flexible to each local context. They accept that international policies are failing to keep up with the pace of globalization and that there are additional responsibilities above and beyond the law, such as labor requirements, open trade, technology, innovation, and global development. They actively engage stakeholders not only to communicate how a business is demonstrating its globally responsible leadership, but also to understand their expectations and concerns and identify solutions to problems and opportunities. They are driven by a vision of the future rather than pushed by the past. That was all the way up to the fourth part of my flow. And we're exactly on my time. And looking at Letitia, I have a final session on the school of the future, which doesn't take that long. I could do that now, or we could take questions. Let's do that. Because when I recognize you, I know you're alumni, right? There's some business people here, but there are also school people. So it's actually the community together who is responsible for the further growth and development and evolution of the school. So let's do that. This is very, very simple. These are three parts that are crucial. You need to move from thought to whole, from local to global, from shareholders to global stakeholder and expanding responsibilities. That's basic. I always use this one because I think it's pedagogical. This is a profit and loss account, nothing else. But at the same time, this is what we call the stakeholder mapping, right? So the stakeholder mapping is basically the old economic system. We have the income, expenses, operating results, and all of that represent the key stakeholders we put in all our basic models: the customers, suppliers, personnel, financial society, and at the bottom line, of course, the shareholders. And that's how we define value creation. It's being done together with the shareholders. This is not the shareholder, this is the stakeholder perspective. But I believe that if you introduce something more profoundly wider regarding the responsibility and the importance that business can play and its role, you have to introduce responsibilities in other aspects, and just was linked to the income and profit loss, the traditional income and profit loss. It has to do with responsibilities towards the environment, coming generations, global challenges and threats. The externalities has to be taken into account sooner or later. That is what we're struggling with. That is what we're struggling with. The externalities is not integrated into our economic systems. They have to. This is last year. No, it's 2 years ago. Jeez. Time is flying. And this is where we have the press conference. So this is UN Global Compact. This is AACSB. This is Angel from Canada. This is GRLI. This is EADIS. when the Principles for Responsible Management Education was launched by Bunkin, he was then really stepping out and saying, I'm taking over the UN Global Compact responsibility, but I'm introducing the importance of education as well. The co-conveners are these: Ethan DA's Aspling Institute, European Management Business and Society. Net impact, you have net impact student activities somewhere around the university or the school beyond? Do you? Here? Which are developing rapidly and quite good. And GMAT. The PRD itself, 6 principles, but the key principle is this one. That's the overriding key one. We will develop the capabilities of students to be future generators of sustainable value for business and society at large, and to work for an inclusive and sustainable global economy. And then there are principles of values, methodology, research, partnership, and dialogue. We had our first global forum in New York, and Letitia had the opportunity to visit that in December last year. We worked on 5 issues, different areas: how to get started, curriculum development, and global research, and sharing information on progress. At that time, I also made an introduction about what I think key drivers of change in schools are, could be, from a global perspective. And this is evident in the GRL. We have all these represented. History and the value base of the school is key. I can give you many examples of schools. That's where it's grounded. The context. If you go to India, and if you go to Mumbai, and you go to Wellingham, and you get to MIMS or any of these schools, you realize that you can't develop business managers in that context without being aware of the role that business has to play for the progress of the society. It's not just possible. And there's a very special context in South Africa as well, which is fascinating, and we should be very careful with, and let's hope that stays there, because it's such a power in itself and resource for the future. Leadership can make a difference. We have cases of that where, just people have taken these things on, including the dean or the chancellor or faculty. There are some places where, for some strange reason, unique pioneering creativity appears and is let loose, and things happen that you couldn't dream of. And then student empowerment. And on student empowerment, I just have a quote from Aspling Institute, because things are changing. The Aspling Institute has a biannual review of MBA students' view on these issues. It hasn't been that positive over the year. They seemed at one time to go in with very high ideals and come out 3 years later from Harvard and have basically forgotten and went straight to Wall Street. And that was their paradigm, right? Business students in 2007 are thinking more broadly about the primary responsibilities of the company. In addition to citing shareholder maximization and satisfying customer needs, more students are also saying creating value for the communities in which they operate is a primary business responsibility. And that's good. So these are some drivers, and I would like to underline the importance of the emerging developing economies. Because so much in the other parts of the world is still stuck with the history and with the past, and is basically going down the road which is the same, integrating and putting in fragmentally. But the emerging economies, in many cases, start with a holistic approach immediately, and that is what's needed. So, as role models, I hope all through the GRLI journey has been the schools from the emerging economies. And as it has been developed, those schools have actually been the ones that are most exciting and and most contribute. So I underline that we see changing world. We see changing world in this sense as well. In practice is being changed. Yes, it is. Things are going on. And here are finally then my personal thoughts on that. I think it's a school where disciplinary boundaries will be bridged in a different way than we see today, and more extensively. The challenges of the business world will drive the growth of intellectual capital to a larger extent than today. So you will actually be driven from outside, from the challenges that are urgent out there, rather than from a set research curriculum that may be just as interesting, but you have to combine. I think this is going to be more important. Because we need action, we need results, and we need things to happen now. The role of business in society will be addressed repeatedly with a holistic global perspective in mind. So we will actually discuss it. It will be on our agenda, and it will be repeatedly on our agenda. Leadership, personal growth, and refinement will be explicitly on the agenda, as with statesmanship and the capability of participating and contributing to the society dialogue. And that is what the CEOs of the large companies in McKinsey survey asked for. They feel handicapped because they haven't that skill. Learning is enhanced in line with the concept of whole person learning. I'm not going to go into that. That's a GRLI, conceptual development. There are books you can see on the website, and you can actually order them if you want them. Partnership with society, business and civil society, has developed further. I'm sure it will. The mission of the school is clear and explicit, and of explicit value to each and every one of the stakeholders. And the vision of a better local, regional, and global future is driving each and every part of this development. And you have introduced the common good as something to strive for, something that you are there to work for. So, be clear on the business case, introduce a wider responsibility for businesses, because that's what the global contacts ask for. Change the way you teach and educate managers and leaders. And for all of us, practice the entrepreneurial approach.